Hey everybody, Brett Tadlock, TNArtist here. Hope you're doing great. Just wanted to jump in here. So I uploaded this video originally and then found out that there was no voiceover with it because I was recording it with my voice as I was doing it. So I'm going to try and go through everything. So what I have here is 8x10 canvas talking about how to find set the names. So you go to color set, show names right there. And that's how you can set the palette to have its names like you see there. Because somebody had asked me about that, so I was trying to explain that process. So what I have here is the watercolor background, and then I've got it this tannish burnt umber kind of color because I wanted to make sure that the paints that I'm using are opaque, so I don't want this to show through, so it's just going to be a good contrasting color to kind of see. And I'm using the acrylic and the oil and the express oil brushes, and then some watercolor techniques on top of that. So what I'm going to do first is fill this, but you'll see here in a second that for some reason the gradient fill didn't release. So what I'm talking about here is just trying to say, okay, this is why I have this here, this stuff to show. So I'll get that filled with stuff, and then we'll use the oils and express oils to start painting. Now the reason I wasn't using just the watercolor to get the watercolor fix is because watercolor is a transparent medium in Rebelle. So I wanted to have the solid colors, so that way it's I can really make sure that I'm not having to go back and try and fight seeing through something. So I'm changing the tilt here so that the top of the canvas is lifted and the bottom is down, so everything's going to flow from top to bottom. And then I've got wet layer on. Now you can see right there I clicked on it. I didn't have gradient selected, but it thought I did for some reason. So I had to go back and forth and then leave it on wet layer. And I find sometimes when you switch it to color and then click contiguous, that it'll make it, it's just a little glitch that it doesn't happen very often. So anyway, so I've got it filled now with this kind of neutral color there. And so that's what I'm going with. All right, so now that I've got this kind of yellowish undertone, what I'm going to do here is just add in a lot of warm yellowish kind of colors with a little bit of maybe orange stuff. Just trying to add some texture and add some runny kind of colors here and there. And you'll see why here in just a minute. But so that's what this next part is, just me adding in paint, letting it flow, using the blow tool to kind of push it around a little bit, and then just kind of working across it. So I'll kind of speed this up for this part. And one of the things I'm doing right here is I'm going in and adding water at the top, and you can see where I use the sponge tool to add dry spots so that the paint breaks and runs around it and interacts with the canvas texture underneath. So that's what you'll see me kind of go back and forth here. So whenever it turns blue, that's the water, and then it's me interacting with it more to lay in either more water or take the sponge and dry a part of it. And then so everything is still tilting down and running towards the bottom. And you can see here I'm taking the blow tool and pushing back up. I guess so basically if I was at the bottom of the page and blowing across it, that's what this is simulating. And so you'll see that it pushes some of the pigment back up into itself and breaks the line from being so even for the drip. Okay, so at this point I have it like I wanted it. I made a layer, put it over top, duplicated it, and then merged it down. And then I have the texture that I wanted. This kind of grungy, stucco kind of a feel. All right. So the next thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to take make a new layer, and then I'm going to go over to the selection tool and select the rectangular marquee. And I'm going to draw one out here real quick. And just kind of get just a good rectangle. And once I've got that, I'm going to hit enter and select it. And I'm going to go to subtract selection, and I'm going to make a line down the middle and hit enter, and that'll give me a blank space there. Now I'm going to do the same thing going horizontal in a couple of spots. What I'm doing here is I'm making a window, because this is going to end up being a wall that's behind it. So now I'm just making the shape of the window that I want and trying to figure out what I want the selection to be. So I've done that there. I've made those. I don't know why I didn't show it, but I've made the horizontals. I've taken them out, and then I filled it with black to give me that nice contrast. And now I'm going to go to stencils, create stencil from selection, and now I have a window stencil that I can recreate and reuse again and again. Okay, so that's a great way to do it for something like this, is just being able to modify it and move it around. So now that I've got that there, what I'll do is I'll start playing around with where I want the placement of the windows and how to do it. So then I just deleted what was in there, and then I shrunk the size of the stencil and put a border, so then I could go back and fill it. And then all I got to do from here is I just right clicked and I drug it over to where I wanted it, and then I can add another one. All right, and so you can kind of line it up and go over, and I'll show you a different way to do this here in just a second. But once I've got it where I want, I can make the new one, and then all I got to do is just close it, and you can hit backspace and it'll go away. So now I have these two windows, quote unquote, there. So then from the next step from there is right click, go to duplicate layer, press T, and then holding Shift, I can just drag straight down and get these spaced out how I want them. Okay, so now I have those there. And once I've got those, I can just merge the layers, either Control E or right click, go to merge layers, and I have them on a separate layer. So now I'm going to do lock transparency, and I'm going to grab a brush. Doesn't really matter which one. I kind of go with I'll go with one of the brushes here in a second and just kind of play around with adding some texture in here. Sorry, the recording's kind of glitchy. I think it's something to do with that's why I didn't record the original audio. But all I did was select the watercolor tool and that flat number 2 and the opacity's down and stuff. And then I'm just kind of smearing it across there to add some interest. That's all it is. It's just adding interest. And then I'll put it into 4 mode and kind of blend it around a little bit so it's not quite as stark. But that's a good way to get just kind of a glass, dark window behind it kind of stuff. So now that I got them together, I can just hit T and move it around to where I want it. And I want it off center. I don't want it necessarily centered, which is another reason why I have it on a separate layer. And then I can go to select again. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a narrow rectangle. And then I'm going to select that. And then I'm going to go back over to subtract and take out the middle part of it. And I'm making the ledge for the windows. So the bottom outside ledge for that. And then once I've got that deselected, I'll go ahead, take the really light color from, first I'll turn off protect or lock transparency so that I can paint it. I hit G there by mistake. That's why it went gray. Now I'll take my paintbrush or the fill and just select one of the lighter colors and fill that. So now I've got those ledges just like that, super simple. And then all I've got to do here is, once I've got that there, I can then just drag it down. And this is the down arrow. And if you hold Shift and push down arrow, it makes it go faster for going straight down. Get that into alignment for where I need it. And then the exact same thing, just fill it. So there we go. Now these all have ledges, super simple windows, super simple way to do it. And have that. And even if you're building, like, say you're doing buildings off in the distance, you can do these windows like this and then just press T and then shrink them down to fit the building. And it's a great way to add in like light reflecting off windows and stuff like that. And really. So now what I'm doing here is I've selected underneath it, and I'm going to take this darker color and just kind of, which is this bluish color, and just lay it over top of it. Then hit 4 and smear it a little bit, and that gives me this really quick shadowy color. Okay, and it matches it because all I had to do was move the rectangle down. And then again, pressing the up arrow and then Shift up arrow, and I just go up to right below these and line them up with and do the exact same thing again. Just some nice shadow. You can also, if you wanted to have this drip or something, you could pause the diffusion and then add in a watercolor and let it run down on its own. And all I'm doing right here is just softening it some, and then I realized right here I got a little aggressive and softened it too much on the side there, so Control Z undid that. And just taking some of that hard edge from the selection tool out. But it's just, again, a nice way to get a really quick shadow and some windows and stuff. So now I've got that there. What I can do here is, so I was thinking, well, I can draw another rectangle if I want and just add a little bit of light to the edge there, just to kind of recess those a little bit. And so I kind of play around with that for a few seconds, and then just go in and freehand it. I'm using the inking. And you can go in and freehand these. You could use the selection tool and do it, whichever, whatever. So what I'm doing here is I'm control clicking on the layer, which selects that, and then I do Control I to invert it. Now I'm outside those black spots, and I can just sketch in that that highlight. And this doesn't, this isn't necessarily the highlight as far as like, oh, the light's coming from this direction. It's more just giving it a slight edge to make it push that back a little bit. So now just merge that down, create a new layer, and I'm going to add this tree stencil in. So I want to add a shadow cast across the front of this, what's becoming a building. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to add this and then play around with adding a few more shadows. And so that's what this is. And so now that I've got the tree there, I can use the selection tool to kind of angle the shadows and give the look feel that it's going to create an angle that's not really there, but the shadow is going to imply that angle. So what I'm doing here is trying to adjust. The shadows got too dark for one part, so I'm trying to do a couple things here. One is I'll try and get rid of that line that's there by just blending it out, which is what I'm doing here, softening it. So at this point I had zoomed in here, so this didn't record the zoom. Weird. Oh. So I'm just fixing the shadow there, and then I'll adjust the depth of the shadow as well. So now that I have them closer in color, I'm just merging out and blending out some of the shadow and softening some of the hard selection edges because I want the light to kind of blend around everything. And now that I've got it softened, and I'll come back and kind of tighten that up a little bit, it's almost too soft. I'm going to go up to Filter, Hue, Saturation, and just kind of play around with the color a little bit to get a little bit more of an interesting look. And I'm just sliding it back. I just always slide it back and forth real quick to kind of go, oh, that one. And then once I get what I like, which isn't too much of a change, just a slight change, then I'll mess with the saturation from there. So as you can see, I just moved it over a little bit and increased the saturation. That to me just gives it a more dynamic look. And I've got it set to multiply, so then it really does work. So here I'm cleaning up some of the over softening that I did for the shadows. And now using the same selection tool, I'm brushing the angle of the shadow and so that it's kind of following that same angle that I established earlier. And now I'll go in and add highlights to this rectangle, this vertical rectangle, and do the same thing. So I'll add the highlight and then kind of soften it back and forth. So now I've got that there, and you can see how that just that little bit starts giving us the implication that it is set up on that angle. So you got a highlight there and stuff. So now I've merged everything and I've selected everything. And now that I've selected it, I'm going to go to perspective and I'm going to shrink in and add perspective so that we have a forced perspective like we're looking up at the building. And again, I don't know why this isn't showing it. All I'm doing right here, and again, I don't know why it's not recording it. I'm just moving the nodes around to get a look. So that's what I end up with. And then from there, I just kind of readjust it again because that's a little too dramatic. But it does give a kind of a cool overall look of like looking up at it. So. And so I'm just going to keep resizing this. Okay, so as you can see, once I get it resized, I then added some blue, just some rough blue in the background to kind of give that sky feeling. And now I'm taking the same light color and laying in, using this leaf brush, some of the leaves to create a dappled look for light breaking through. And now that I've got those in there, I'm going to go to the top up here and add in some leaves around my branches, some shadows. And because I've got this on a separate layer, I can really just kind of play around with it. And really, it kind of starts tying it all together that the light's breaking through. And I'll come back later and clean up some of the edges here and stuff. And then also kind of smudge out some of the light so that it looks like it's really kind of stretching up on it. And again, adjusting the perspective for the light so that it kind of does the same thing that the tree is doing, so it's in a similar perspective. Now it's time to come in and clean up some of the areas and fix some of the colors and so forth. So that's what I'm doing here. And again, just starting to add some tweaks here and there to the colors, some highlights, and adding some interest so I don't just have this big dead area of space. So just a quick way to add some texture. And as you can see here, I'm just kind of going in and cleaning up the edges, blending everything, softening it a little bit so I don't have as harsh of edges. And I'll do the same with the leaves here in just a little bit as well. I'm going to add a shadow. I thought it'd be kind of cool to add a shadow of maybe some birds coming across. So you'll see those come on here in a minute too. And then I add some, and then I thought, well, what if I had like the hint of the white birds kind of flying across? And I play around with that for a little bit, then I decided, no, it's too distracting. So I'll speed this up a little bit so you can see all that going in. So the birds' shadows are added in. I'm trying to figure out exactly where to add more, if I want to add more or not, and then hiding it. Now the next thing I want to do is I want these shadows to kind of reflect the angle that's going in there. So I'm going to select those birds that are overlapping that, and actually some of it's not. So I try to stay within that lighter area, and just kind of distort it a little bit. Got that selected. I accept it, and then I go into and now I'm just going to kind of stretch it to match the angle. Trying to capture that weird kind of look that shadows do when they stretch over something as something's moving across it. So that's what I'm doing here. And then the next thing I'm going to do is go in, and obviously I'm lightening those a little bit, and then I'm going to go in and smudge them a little bit. So it's going to give kind of almost a motion blur kind of a feel. So you'll see me do that here in a minute as well. Now what I'm doing here is, like I said before, I was trying to say, okay, well, what would it look like if you could see maybe just hints of the white birds flying by? Like maybe that's so you can have that reference to their shadows. And I play around with this for a little bit. And I thought about cutting it out, but I wanted you guys to see that, hey, you know, you got to go through this thought process sometimes. And that's the great thing about digital, is that you can paint it in and be like, nope, and then just undo it. So I'm playing around with like textures and everything else to kind of make it stand out from the shadows that are there of the trees. But then I realized, that's just too busy behind it. This is just adding to the busyness, and I don't really care for it overall. So eventually, like I said, I just delete these out and leave them out. Now at this point, we're starting to kind of hone in on what the final is going to be, and I wanted to add some texture, so I created a layer underneath the building and everything else, and I'm using one of the like the dry flat brush here to just paint in some brush strokes. This was too flat, and because I wanted the texture of the brush strokes, and so I'm just trying to lay it in a way that makes sense for it. So this is a good way to get some of that impasto look with without having to paint everything that's that way. So, but you got to be careful with it because it can be overdone in my opinion and look too flat. So hit Control A and didn't realize it, so then I had to undo it. And it's because I meant to hit Control Z, but I hit Control A. And so now I'm just adding in some of those, and I'll go back and soften a lot of these and kind of play around with it. But to me, it just gave it a little bit more interest. And then the next thing I'm going to do is kind of soften up some of these leaves. I said the next thing I was going to do. Actually, the next thing was actually going along the edge here and cleaning up this edge because I realized it was all cut off too much. And it gave kind of a weird fakeness to it. So I had to go back in and repaint some of this. Not a big deal. Just, little pieces of putting the icing on the cake. Okay, so now here I've deleted some of the leaves, I've smudged some of them, and I'm going to continue to smudge them like I've mentioned before, and soften some of these areas because I really wanted it to look like it's broken up and not a leaf brush, if you will. So I want to have it implied and not necessarily just, perfect. And then some of the other things that I'm going to do as we finish this out is I'll add in some texture at the top of the shadow there, so maybe it looks like the building or a wall or something that's casting a shadow or whatever. Just a little bit of added interest. You can leave it out or put it in, whatever you want to do. But definitely, if you have this cast shadow across, give it some softer edges and some hard edges, so that way you really can play around with how everything is hitting everything. Just makes it look nicer. And again, coming up is another thing that I tried to experiment with. So I'd added these bush shadow down here, and I thought, oh, I wonder if, if you add a shadow of maybe a person, just kind of a rough shadow of a person, nothing really crazy. So I made a new layer and decided that I wanted to take this darker color and add it in here. Again, ended up hating this and deleting it out, thought about just not even bothering, but I want you guys to see the thought process. So I had the person there, definitely would have changed the shadow, but I thought, what if there was up like they were taking the picture of this? And I thought it could be interesting. So, but again, wasn't really fond of it. Didn't really care for it. So I just kind of moved it around, repositioned it, and then I thought, well, what if it's over here? What if it's over here? And I thought, it just doesn't look right. It's distracting. So I take it back out. But again, play around with these things. That's why we can do digital artwork, is so that we can experiment. And for me, like I just finished up a 4-foot by 5-foot traditional painting. It helps. It helps translate over to your traditional. It gets you thinking better in a better process. So this is that person just trying to soften it out a little bit. But then I was like, yeah, I can soften it. I can kind of sculpt the shadow a little more. And it's like, the more I did it, the more I thought, no, I don't really care for it at all being there. So yeah, but like I said, just play around and experiment. I hope this was a good tutorial for you for being able to see how to add some shadows and some interest and play around with light and all that, and just kind of get that bouncing effect and kind of some drama to it and do all that. So I'm just going to finish up a few touches here, and then other than that, I will see you on the next one. Thanks so much for watching.